Good afternoon. My name is Howard Knepper, and on October 28, 2011, I filed with the federal government my candidacy to run for the President of the United States. I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1961, which is a significant date because it relates to part of my speech today in reference to the Cuban Bay of Pigs disaster in 1961. Now, I know our country is facing very difficult times with many issues both foreign and in domestic policy. Today, I want to speak about my position on foreign policy in relation to Cuba, Iran, North Korea, and Afghanistan. And I will also speak to you about my view to how to bring back our country to a healthy economic position and how to create more jobs for the American people. Now, our country is in a horrible position both in foreign and domestic policy, and this is all due to our current politicians in the Senate, the Congress, and our current president. But there is light at the end of the tunnel, because the candidate that speaks before you today has never been a politician. I am coming to the presidency as a regular citizen just like you. Our forefathers didn't require that I have experience to be the President of the United States. They believed that any citizen that was capable to lead the American people from strength, intelligence, and foresight was all that was required. The American people must realize that this is their Constitution and the government works for them. The American people as citizens must get more involved in the political process and must understand that the process of what the Congress and Senate is doing. Somehow, over the last 4 decades, this has been some type of separation between the American people and its government. We hear less from you, the American people, voicing your opinion to the Congress and the President on foreign policy and economic policy. I am the first candidate ever running for the presidency of the United States to make it clear to the American people that the United States policy towards Cuba has been an atrocity for 48 years. The only way for Cuba to become a nation that has liberty and justice and freedom for all is for the United States military to overthrow the Castro-Cuban government by an invasion into Cuba by U.S. forces. The sanctions against Cuba will not free the Cuban people from this vicious regime. That is why, in 1960, President Dwight Eisenhower, who was a 2-term president before John F. Kennedy took office, made it clear that Fidel Castro should never be permitted to remain a dictator over the Cuban people and their country. President Eisenhower laid out a plan called the Bay of Pigs. There was a plan for the Cuban people to overthrow the Castro regime with the secret backing of the United States military. Our late President Kennedy implemented those plans because he agreed with President Eisenhower that all of Latin America should be free of dictators in our Western Hemisphere. He also believed that Fidel Castro was a war criminal and should not be allowed to remain a dictator in Cuba. President Kennedy, in the middle of the Bay of Pigs invasion, decided to turn the planes coming from America that he had promised he would do and not support the Cubans that had already started their attack on the Fidel Castro regime. Now, President Kennedy later admitted that that was a mistake. He delivered a speech in Miami promising that the Cuban Brigade 2506 that he let down by not covering them with our military aircraft, that he would someday deliver that Cuban flag to a free Cuba that had free elections. I believe that if President Kennedy had lived and would not have been assassinated, that he would have eventually overthrown the Cuban regime and delivered this flag to the Cuban people as promised, to a free Cuba. Fidel Castro, like any dictator, has only one goal in mind: to strip its people of all liberties, freedom, and their God-given right to choose their own leaders, to travel and to express their opinions without fear of imprisonment. Fidel Castro is equal to Adolf Hitler in my view. He is a despicable war criminal, as well as his brother Raul Castro, for the murders and tortures and exiling its own Cuban citizens from their own country for his own benefit. They should be brought to justice for crimes against humanity. When the Cuban people vote for their own president by free elections, they will decide the fate of the Castro regime and all of the people that participated in the atrocities against the Cuban people. If I become the President of the United States of America, I will not agree for Fidel Castro and Raul Castro to be exiled out of Cuba. Both of these men should be charged as war criminals and crimes against humanity. When the missile crisis occurred, President Kennedy made a statement which was part of the settlement of the missile crisis. That statement was that the United States of America would not invade Cuba as long as the missiles that were placed in the island by Cuba by the Russians would be removed. But what many people don't realize is that there was an agreement between Cuba and the United States and Fidel Castro in relation to President Kennedy's statement that we would not invade Cuba. And that agreement by the Cuban government and Fidel Castro has been broken numerous times, which therefore gives the U.S. the power and authority to invade Cuba and overthrow the Cuban government. How can we say in America that we are truly for liberty and justice for all people when 90 miles off our own coast, Cuba remains an imprisoned island controlled by war criminals, which have stripped the Cuban people of all of their rights and freedoms and justice? People around the world say that America only frees people from countries that have something to offer us like oil or benefits the United States. But this is not true. There is only one standard for freedom of people, and that is that it is everyone's God-given right to be free and to elect its free leaders. The U.S. government has been around the world advocating freedom for numerous countries, which we should. They have put our military men and women at risk, and many of those men and women that fought for other countries' freedom were Cuban-born. They were part of the American Army. But yet the U.S. government has for over 40 years ignored and refuses to invade Cuba and free this nation from its vicious dictators. As President Eisenhower said in one of his speeches, we cannot believe in liberties as long as Cuba remains under the dictatorship of a Castro regime. The Cuban regime has used its propaganda to persuade other Latin American countries to turn its back on liberty and justice and freedom for its own people, starting with Venezuela. Hugo Chavez is also a war criminal trained by Fidel Castro and now is becoming a dictator over the Venezuelan people. The United States of America should never allow in our Western Hemisphere dictatorships that threaten our liberties and our freedoms. We must show all of Latin America that the United States will use all of its strength and military to stop the Cuban regime and the Venezuelan government from supporting other Latin American countries to turn to dictatorships. I've gotten to know the Cuban people over the last 30 years residing in Miami. The Cuban people are the hardest working, decent people in this world. One of the greatest assets of the Cuban people is the patience that they have had for over 40 years of allowing this dictatorship to continue. The fact that the United States government would allow these war criminals controlling Cuba to exile its own citizens out of Cuba by tortures and killings is beyond comprehension, just as the German government slaughtered millions of people in World War II. I have read the views of my current Republican candidates that I face for the nomination, as well as President Obama's views on Cuba. None of them advocate the invasion of Cuba by U.S. forces.